Well, what do you know? There's actually a thing happening, which is rather nice. We'll pull that back in and double check to make sure everything's going there. Yeah, I think we're good to go. I see mic audio, or microphone audio, not mic audio. Mic audio is a different person. So here we are, taking a little while to get things going. We'll see how it all goes. Might grab some water. Let me do that. Let me grab some water and some tea. Yeah, I'm gonna move some chai. Let's get some chai. Where'd my water go? My water here? Where's my water? There it is. Okay. So there's some water, and I'll have some tea here in a moment. Ha! There. So hello everyone. Hey Jay. Good to see you. As always, got my tea working in there, and looking forward to talk anime a little bit. I have no idea what I'm doing tonight. I'm pretty tired. I have been getting very little sleep the past few nights, and so I'm kind of loopy tonight. And hello, Laser Show. So this is just going to be probably a relaxed, weird night. One of the two. Actually been watching some of the Great British Baking Show this week. Nothing to do with anime at all, although one of the contestants is definitely an otaku. And a somewhat quirky person at that. A little afraid that they were going to push that really heavily, but they haven't. She's just quirky. And kind of interesting seeing that. One of these people for whom everything has a Japanese twist. Not everything. That's unfair. But one of those things you're like, but who knows? So that's fun. I love baking. I love cooking. Might do some baking this weekend. It'll be a good weekend to bake, because it's going to be a rainy, cold weekend, it looks like. And I'm looking to the side because my tea is brewing. I hear it brewing in the other room, which is a lovely sound, knowing that tea is on its way. Tea being one of the great beverages of human civilization, in my personal opinion. And I do have something special to show you guys tonight that just arrived in the mail. And will be an interesting thing to look through. And I'll probably end up posting a video of that once we're done. And so how are you all doing? What's been up with you all in terms of this week? Watching any anime? Anything like that? I finished Laid Back Camp this past weekend. That was lovely. Hey, Tonto. Don't know if I mentioned finishing Laid Back Camp. Very relaxed, very chill anime series with a remarkably satisfying ending for a show about nothing. It does build up to a little bit of a climax, but ends in a way that just feels right, while still leaving it open for some more stuff. There will be another season. You're watching Kabaneri. Cool. So yeah, definitely looking forward to more Laid Back Camp and hoping to see more interesting stuff from that. But yeah, it was if you watch the first episode and the style and tone of that show appeal, then the season will, or the rest of the show, I think will deliver on that. Some fun things too. Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting season, definitely coming up. in just what, a month or two. Like early January, I think, is when the new season drops. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. We will be doing an all-day anime stream. I think the second weekend of January, something like that, is when I'll do that, because there should be stuff available at that point. Boogie Bop definitely above that, or definitely high on that for me. Is the original Eva dub good? What does good mean? You know, purists spit on it, but they spit on everything. I listened to it. I thought it was effective. I thought it was, I like the dub. Certainly the voices fit the characters well. Let me grab my tea. Yeah, I thought everyone did well. Of course, I've only seen the first 8 episodes of that, and then the last 2. So I can't judge that well, but it seemed like a perfectly good dub to me. I've got some chai here, which I've started to appreciate more over time. I used to hate chai tea. And I realized it's just taken me a while to get used to the spiciness of it. Hello, Suzume. It's a very different take on tea, something very strong. And I actually like strong tea in terms of strong flavors. But that combination, hey Game Escape, good to see you. That combination of stuff was just, too much for me until I just drunk it for a while. Then I started really liking it. Oh, interesting. That's cool. So what I wanted to share with you all tonight, not anime related, but so this arrived in the mail today. This is an art book, if you will, and history book about Dungeons and Dragons. And it basically charts the art of D&D over time. And it's gorgeous. I got it on sale. There was a flash sale. And I picked it up. And I just want to give you an idea of some of it. One of the neat things is you get detail on some of this really early art, which might be just a tiny thing in a corner. You can really zoom in on those with this and really get a sense of the strength of that art. This is stuff from very early D&D, what we call 0th edition and 1st edition. So some kind of crazy art and then some rather lovely stuff, actually. And one of the things to understand is that a lot of the early art was done by teenagers, literally just teens that the family of the creators knew and had drawn. They would just draw stuff and draw unicorns and such, and they throw them into the books. So when these things look amateurish, it's because these artists usually were literally amateurs doing this, and they would work for peanuts, and so that worked. I'm going to try to avoid anything too risque here, obviously. It costs like $23 because it's in a flash sale. The MSRP is $50. As you see some of this really fun stuff. We'll skip past some of the devil worshipping worries. Some of this lovely stuff. Let's see some things that are a little more helpful and interesting. So here's a fun, very colorful cover from back in the early days of crazy things going on. Really fun. So this was, I think, Jim Rosloff, one of the early artists, and it's kind of a fun aesthetic in the early days. Much more upbeat than it eventually got. And then time went on, and we started getting some of the later stuff. Let me just show you. There's some very 80s stuff in here, obviously. So you get stuff like, this from Dragonlance, which is definitely nice. And the nice thing is there's a large amount of text that you can see explaining the history of the game and the artistic intent of the game, kind of what kinds of art were being commissioned, what they were trying to convey, whether they were trying to be more serious, trying to be more gritty, etc., and so forth. With the satanic panic, if you will, of the early 80s, there was a move away from any sort of edgy art. But then you get stuff like this, which is certainly not edgy in any way, but absolutely fantastic. Like, look at that. Who would not want to, to play that game? Yeah, we will get to that, Jay. That is a good topic. You got some of that stuff. And then, so they did a magazine called Dungeon, which was just a series of adventures. And came out, I think, monthly or every other month. And here's the cover for the first issue of Dungeon. This is, what was this? 1986? Looks about right. So here's the cover for their very first issue of their magazine. Look at that. I mean, talk about dramatic. It's not hugely three-dimensional, but it's not really meant to be. It's meant to be a little more iconic, a little more abstract, a little bit more, in your face. That's pretty darn cool. And then you also get some neat stuff here. Another example where they'll show you the evolution of various monsters in the art over time. And obviously, if you haven't played the game, that's not as important, but it's interesting to see just artistically how they envisioned a particular creature as time went on. Where is one? They're kind of scattered through, so it's hard to find a precise one, and sometimes you just accidentally flip right by it. See if we can find one. There we go. So here's the famous Demogorgon, as made famous in Stranger Things. So there's the original Demogorgon. Pretty simple. Again, these are teenagers. And then expanded, and then the 4th edition version, and now the current 5th edition version. It's a pretty nasty beast there. And you can just see how they kept rethinking what this thing looked like over time. Kind of interesting. Oh yeah, D&D inspired tons of video games over time. And you can just see some of this stuff. Let me show you some stuff from Dark Sun. Actually, we'll show you some Dark Sun and Planescape. This was conceived as a new D&D world that was fantasy but contained no fantasy tropes. No elves, no dwarves, none of that stuff. They ended up including a race called elves, but they weren't like elves, and a race called dwarves and such. But the idea was to make this very, very different. And so this is a little risque, but nothing too bad. So here was kind of the art style that they went with for Dark Sun. Very post-apocalyptic, very Mad Max for those characters and that art style. And then give you some more examples here. I mean, yeah, that's pretty dramatic stuff. Pretty serious stuff. And you can see why just the art pieces inspire you to play the game. And then they went for a Planescape, which was this big sort of gothic, world-spanning, dimension-spanning game. And you got this lovely, almost Brian Froud style art, almost Dark Crystal-esque art for a lot of that game. And again, it's the kind of thing where you look at that and you're like, huh, I want to explore that. It's really interesting artistically. So it's long, 438 pages. A lot of material here. Here's a good example. So Strad von Zarovich is basically D&D's version of Dracula. And as you can see how his design changed over time. So you get this initial piece, right? Very, very straightforward. And then you get a slightly more abstract piece. And then he evolves over time to something much more Hammer horror, much more 70s or 80s horror movie style. And then you go down to his more his versions today. You get this one here from basically 4th edition, I believe, and then the much more grounded and gritty and realistic version of the modern era. Just because those were the kinds of things people liked back in the day. So really cool book. MSRP is $50 US, and I'm really enjoying it. This is a book where I don't know that I'd buy it for 50, but for like 23, it was absolutely a steal. I would probably buy it for 40 at least. I mean, I'll put it this way. I'll get an idea of how much people love this book. Oops, there we go. Yeah, that's a quote from the writer and director of Guardians of the Galaxy for this book about how much he loves it. Yeah, pretty darn cool. And a nice hardback. It's always nice to get a really strong hardback. All right. So Jay, you talked about the format of anime releases. I think that's a really interesting topic I would love to dive into. I completely agree. Yeah, and Lotus was very much inspired by D&D. Lotus was basically a D&D campaign. It was actually a tabletop RPG campaign, but the system was inspired by D&D. That they then recorded and made into an anime series, basically. So yeah, Lotus was very much inspired by kind of that 80s era, late 70s, early 80s era D&D artwork. So yeah, let's talk a bit about the format of anime releases, and so let's go back historically a little bit, because back when anime was first coming out over in America, it was rare for people to actually license a full series. They would generally license it a few episodes at a time, and then release what they could, if you will. So you get a license for Dragon Ball Z, say, and you'd start releasing episodes, but it was highly unlikely you would release the entire thing. Maybe you get to the end, but who knows? And so you just release tapes as much as possible. Of course, this is back in the VCR days. So that was how you got anime, at least on home video. The only other option was either television, so it was either home video, television, and just kind of waiting for it to show up, or you had to actually own like a film projector and physical copies of the films or TV and such. So that was the thing. And one of the problems with VHS is that there are no ways of doing alternate versions on there. So the problem is if you wanted the dub, you got the dub on VHS. If you wanted the sub, you got the sub version on VHS. You couldn't get both at once. You had to buy one or the other. Hey, Spin, good to see you. So that was how it got started. You got kind of as much as you could, and folks would generally they would prefer to license movies and OVAs over TV series because of the chance you're going to actually get all of that material, right? You probably were not going to finish an entire TV series. It would just take too long to release, take too much time and effort. But you could definitely release a movie. Also, importantly, this is something I didn't learn until fairly recently. It was almost impossible to get a subbed piece of anime on television, even on cable. There's just no one was interested in doing that. So it didn't make a lot of sense to buy something and release it sub only. You basically had to dub it if you wanted any chance of it actually getting shown anywhere outside of just on a VHS tape. So that's why dubs were so big, because that was, you were going to make one anyway, basically, if you were releasing it. Yep, finished Eurocamp. Loved it. And so that was basically how folks did. And then, of course, I should also point out there was one other way of getting anime, tapes from Japan. Actually paying somebody, or not paying somebody, but getting someone in Japan to tape anime off television and send it to you. Raw, untranslated. You just get it, and hopefully your Japanese friend would write a little summary of what happened in that episode. Like a one-paragraph summary. Oh, cool. Hey, Ferris. And yeah, so your options were very limited. You either knew somebody in Japan or you had to buy the tapes. And there were one or two people out there who had the reels, but that was vanishingly unlikely. So that's one of the reasons you went to conventions, because people at conventions, there's usually somebody there with a copy of something, or who could screen an anime, a movie or something. So yeah, and then as fandom grew, you started getting DVDs, which finally allowed you to have both the sub and the dub on the same platform and the same media, so you didn't have to choose one or the other. And again, back or further, a tape containing 2 episodes would cost maybe $40 on VHS, and that was just the dub or just the sub. So when you went on to DVD, something that wasn't a problem anymore. DVD was obviously more expensive, but it kind of solved that problem. Yeah, Laserdisc was a great format, and it was very popular in Japan, but it was so hideously expensive. A movie would cost $80 on Laserdisc versus $30 on tape. So that was it never really caught on because people just could not afford to buy a Laserdisc player and a Laserdisc, unfortunately. So yeah, technically excellent platform, but not the right one for anime as a larger fan base. And of course, by the point you got into DVD, anime fandom in America at least had progressed into late college, young adult territory. So folks in their early 20s basically were generally the folks watching and consuming anime, and not a lot of those, not cheap to ship either, exactly. So not a lot of those folks could afford a Laserdisc player, but they could afford VCR. It's kind of like Betamax. And by the way, people will tell you that the reason that that VHS won out over Betamax is because the adult industry chose VHS. That's actually kind of backwards. VHS was about a quarter the cost of a Betamax player, and the adult industry saw that the public was trending towards VHS. People just were not buying Betamax, so they switched over to VHS instead of supporting both formats, and that was kind of the big one of the big signifiers that one or the other was winning. But it was kind of the public moving away from Betamax that caused the industry to choose that. So not really working there. So cool to hear that, Ferris. Nice. Yeah, anime fans were big Laserdisc proponents, partly because a lot of Laserdiscs had English subtitles on them in Japan. When the Laserdiscs were being pressed in Japan, they were made with English subtitles because they were much easier to market internationally, not just in the U.S. but in Korea and China and other countries in Europe and such. You could just ship a Laserdisc, and a Laserdisc would play anywhere, as I understand. I believe Laserdisc was region free. Is that correct? I think it was. So you just throw things on there, and or rather, so they would just throw subtitles on there. So if you got a Laserdisc, you'd often get a sub anyway, which made those very much, worth it if you could afford them. But most folks couldn't. So Laserdisc unfortunately became one of those cul-de-sac media where great idea, but just never caught on. So that was unfortunate. But then of course, along came streaming, and initially, okay, yeah, they were region free, so that makes sense. So you had Laserdisc, and they were kind of out there, and you had DVDs primarily, and some VHS tapes because VCRs just kept on going. And then you got streaming. Now I remember actually when YouTube was known by YouTube, Google, when it was just this new concept service thing. In fact, I remember um, using a very early streaming service, and this must have been like the year 2000, roughly. Yeah, it was around 2000 when, and I tried to watch The Wings of Honey Mise on their service, and the video was about that big in one corner, trying to play this movie, and all pixelated and just ridiculous. But then streaming happened, and suddenly people realized, well, we can just throw some files up there on a server and use these cool new streaming formats to display things. And it was all pirated to begin with. Like nobody was offering anime streaming legally early on. You would get occasional things where a Japanese TV station would put up streaming versions of some of their shows. Nia Under 7, actually. The anime series from the creators of Lane, streamed on Wow Wow's website. That's how I first saw it. I watched episodes of that on their website to get a feel for the show. Not translated, just raw. And so you get those, here and there, but that would happen, a couple times a year, basically. And then, yeah, and that's the thing, Laser Show, is that, you were very much limited by whatever was for sale, whatever you could get from a friend. You couldn't just go to a catalog and pick things. Now, by the time DVDs came around, there were enough American distributors that there were catalogs and such, but even then you were getting very, very little of that stuff. There was just not a lot of anime available because it was expensive to license. It was expensive to release. So, you weren't going to just license everything and anything. You just, you get what folks can afford to license. And it was very piecemeal. You get a very, very, very small percentage of the market. Who sold the videos? So generally speaking, pirates wouldn't sell videos. They would trade them, or they would offer them for like $2 per tape, basically the cost of a VHS tape. Is what you would spend to get something. If you found these things like in catalogs and such, pirates would sometimes put out catalogs or later on websites. So you go on a website and you'd see this thing that would be allaccessanime.com, right? And you'd go there and it would have catalogs of all this anime you could buy, and it would be $50 for a 50 episode anime series, or $20 for a 26 episode anime series. And this is back when anime was much more expensive than that, when 50 episode anime series would be $200. And those were the folks where that was definitely bootlegging. That was full scale piracy, and you'd see that happen. Has the ease of streaming cheapened the viewing experience in the sense that you can become spoiled for choice? Physical media makes you invest more attention at some level. I completely agree with that. I think that there is an aspect of that where folks just pick things up and put them down, and they don't really pay as much attention as they used to. I think that's just the reality of just a different format. I think streaming also has a disadvantage that because there's so much out there and because it's so convenient, people tend to assume that the streaming stuff is all there is. And so you see people, and I'm guilty of this too, where they'll watch all the anime coming out on Crunchyroll and never even look to see if there's any other anime airing that season. And maybe other great stuff out there, right? And that's just kind of the nature of things. Where, well, I got all this stuff. Why would I push myself when I'm already overwhelmed with choice? But yeah, I mean, and by the way, that website, I I completely made that up. Um, I did that. Like there were one or two times when I bought some bootlegs because that was the only way of getting those particular anime series. I ended up buying them legitimately once they were out. But hey, Cephalopod. Um, Dating on the movies, yeah, yeah, likely bootlegged. Um, yeah, and it became this interesting trend where early on, if you were an otaku, it meant you were severely disadvantaged. You loved this stuff that you could not get your hands on. So people would uh, often fall for piracy and bootlegging without realizing it, and they wouldn't even really want to believe that they had bought something bootlegged. They wouldn't really pay attention. I actually had some friends who did this, where they bought some stuff, and I was like, "This is bootleg. This is definitely bootlegged." You just see it all over the material, and they just didn't really want to believe it. But then it shifted once kind of streaming and especially once fan subs became ubiquitous and just very easy to get. Um, that became kind of the norm to just watch fan subs without even worrying about buying this stuff originally or getting it in a legitimate way. And again, it's one of those things where, reasonable otaku back in the day would sometimes, get illegitimate stuff because that was the only way to get it. But then it turned into we just watch fan subs. That's just the only way we consume this medium because they're easy. They're there. And so that convenience became a problem, right? Thoughts on Blu-ray versus DVD? Old school style anime looks almost too clean on Blu-ray disc. That is absolutely a thing where when folks take something that was made in standard def and then put it on Blu-ray and often upscale it to Blu-ray, it's like, well, the original work wasn't that high res to begin with. So what you're ending up with on Blu-ray is this different version of the work. We talked about this a little bit last week. Thank you, Varys. Let me slow down a bit. One of the problems you get with Blu-ray is that, and one of the reasons you see some releases that describe themselves as standard def Blu-ray is because the original material was standard def. And so when you're putting it on Blu-ray, it's like, well, upscaling it is changing it. That is not the original experience that the creators intended, right? It's not the same as 16 millimeter film, where that original film stock has high resolution to it. An anime from the 70s generally was not made on 16 millimeter film or whatever. So that's the best you can get. Now, I'm not against upscaling or trying to make Blu-ray look good, or trying to use Blu-ray to make a show look good, but it is a difference, right? You're not getting the same anime that you had back in the day. Oh, hey, Kaminoko. Good to see you. Yeah, the translation thing, part of the problem with translation is that it's very difficult to accurately judge the accuracy of a translation unless you actually know both of the languages involved very deeply. Like, it's easy to jump to conclusions about things. Great example of that. In Japanese, there's a word anata, which is generally a formal word you use with someone that you don't know very well to refer to them. It's basically you, Y-O-U, in Japanese. But it's you would not use that word with somebody that you don't know. Well, you would generally use that word with somebody that you don't know, a stranger, things along those lines. And so then I watched an anime series in Japanese with an English translation, and there's a very loving husband and wife, and like in episode 2, he refers to her with anata, and in this very loving scene. And I was like, ah, like there's a lot more going on below the surface of this relationship. They're not as close as it appears to be. They're not nearly as lovey-dovey because he's using that word. And that was not in the translation at all. It was translated as like love, oh, yes, love, yes, honey. I later found out, after watching this series and looking for this layer of the conversation of that relationship, that anata is absolutely also used in Japanese as a term of endearment amongst husband and wife that love each other very much. So I was, because I thought I knew Japanese, right? I was interpreting this thing with something that wasn't there because I didn't know enough Japanese. And again, I don't know. And again, part of the problem too is that the people arguing for the accuracy of fan subs or professional translations are usually fan subbers or professional translators. And we have very little in the way of independent voices on either side of that. So it's really hard to say. Back on conversations and signs, and absolutely, it's certainly true that the fan subbers would often translate lots of other details that weren't there in the official translations. That was often very nice, very useful. But yeah, it's weird and complicated, and of course it's further complicated by the fact that these days, as in within the past 3 years or so, the original studios and companies will often send a representative or assign somebody to the English translation group to answer questions. So they're actually working with the original folks now, which wasn't true before, which also changes things as well. Hanjo TV, good to know. So yeah, that's really weird and complicated. Because again, we don't know on either side of that thing. But that also fueled the fire of fan subs versus DVDs, Blu-rays, and such, because people were like, well, the fan sub appears to be more accurate, and in some cases was. In some cases, these parts were translated more accurately than these other parts, right? Yeah. Or dependent on the group. So that was often a reason to go fan sub instead of official translation. But then that meant that there was less money going to not just the American companies, but also through licensing back to the Japanese companies. And so we had the crash of the 2000s, and both Japanese and American companies started going out of business. It's that was a big problem. And I think the industry did a pretty good job of communicating to fans, especially through like voice actors talking at anime conventions, of saying, hey guys, if nobody buys this stuff, it doesn't get made. There has to be some financial transactions happening for people to keep making the stuff. Otherwise, they're going to go off and make other things. And so that adjusted, and folks realized, oh, okay, well, I need to support the industry somewhere, somehow. And of course, now you have Blu-ray, which gives you a lot of options in terms of configurability, in terms of being able to get interviews, behind the scenes stuff. Unfortunately, all that stuff costs money to license. But the Blu-rays are now getting more useful, and now that they're aiming more towards thank you, Ferris. That reminds me of something. Now that they're aiming more towards making more deluxe box sets, that also just seems to be a way to keep the industry going. Something a lot of folks don't realize about those expensive box sets is that you're right. You're never going to buy that $200 box set. But other people will. There are hardcore fans out there who will absolutely get that because they want the little figurine and the armband and the toaster oven and whatever else that comes with it. So that is there. And TV, you're absolutely right. So we'll get back to that in a second. So that collector's edition market is very, very significant, not because it's huge, but because there are enough of it to make the money, right? So yeah, TV definitely helped a lot in America, at least with Toonami, and with anime just generally being available on television, with channels like Tech TV showing, Lane and a lot of other weird shows. At midnight on that channel, there's a lot of cool weird stuff on there, and you just started seeing one or two anime series on various weird, channels here and there, and that just helped folks to know that these things existed. Um, so yeah, that helped. And of course, Toonami came back, which helped a lot. And it was also helped, we'll be honest, with the push towards anime style in animation in general, where American animated TV started looking more like anime anyway. So, why do the pirates get paid and not Viz Media? Mainly because the pirates will set up a streaming site with ads all over it, and when you go and you watch, and they'll set up all of their search engine optimization so that when you search for One Piece, their site pops up in that first page as watch One Piece streaming free, and everyone who goes there, that earns them 5 cents per person, and that just works, right? You don't have to have a million people on your site to make that worthwhile. And if someone realizes what you're doing and shuts you down, then you just buy a new domain name and start up again, tomorrow. So that kind of works. And again, the pirates would set up catalogs. They'd set up websites for the actual discs, and they would just have a garage full of bootleg DVDs they'd burned, and if you ordered, they'd ship it off to you. And a lot of folks didn't care. They didn't care. They didn't pay attention. If they could find it for $20 instead of $40, they would buy it, and they wouldn't notice that it was going to a pirate, not Viz. Yeah, Sci-Fi Channel. I mean, the Sci-Fi Channel is one of the things that got me into anime. So Sci-Fi Channel absolutely was one of the big things, because they did a lot of anime. They did their festivals of anime, which would be, I think, a 3 or 4 hour block, weekdays, but during the summer, so not sweeps. And they just show a bunch of anime, and then they started doing their Saturday anime, where they'd show a movie or an OVA every Saturday, and so you could go there and watch Ninja Scroll or Robot Carnival or Venus Wars or whatever. And you didn't just every Saturday, you didn't know what you'd get. You just sit down and watch some anime film, and that was huge. Hello, Ginger Gaiden. Good to see you. So Sci-Fi Channel was huge, and then again Toonami as well. And then, I mean, lest we forget, Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon was on regular American television in like the 90s, like the early 90s. A lot of the local affiliates, your local version of Channel 5 or Channel 4 or NBC or CBS, whatever, they'd often license those shows and show them in the morning. And so you could see Dragon Ball Z or Ronin Warriors or what have you early in there. Yeah, MTV. That's interesting. I know MTV. Well, they did show certainly that Alexander the Great anime. But yeah, they definitely showed anime and anime adjacent stuff as well. Oh yeah, absolutely. Spin to win. Very, very few people in any industry make money off of it. Any creative industry make money off of it. There's Katy Perry and, a handful of others, and then there are thousands of other artists who are, not making a living wage at that. That's just art. We have that problem actually in the D&D tabletop community, where folks will set up a virtual storefront and put up a game, some 32-page game they've made, and kind of sit back and wait for the royalties to come in and for them to be able to retire, and they make, $10 a month because I'm sorry, you know, there are very few people actually explode like that. Yeah, and then you have this interesting thing. You're right, Jay, where there was this period where a lot, some people in America, some of the big companies really pushed anime, and they would just do a media blitz for a show. Cardcaptors is a great example, where it came on, they licensed it, they showed it, and it did not last on American television for very long, but there were a lot of toys. There's a big push behind it, and so it kind of got into the public consciousness in this way. Escaflowne, they tried to get on air, and that did not last very long either, much less time. But it was a big deal. Like they had promos, and they were really pushing that as a full scale TV series in America for Americans. And so you got that, and this is also part of another one we really need to mention, obviously, Pokemon. Right, Pokemon changed things dramatically because suddenly you had an anime that was popular on its own. It wasn't popular with the otaku particularly, although I knew people who were Pokemon otaku like before it came over, and were enraged that they weren't showing the breast episode in America. Yeah, how dare you? Or at least that scene. So yeah, Pokemon was suddenly this massive cultural phenomenon, and that encouraged a lot of folks to say, okay, we can bring over these shows. We can bring over Digimon and Monster Rancher, especially the kids shows, and really market them to pieces, and we might get a big hit out of it. But yeah, we demand our seizures. Exactly. Yeah. Artistic integrity all the way. That's really funny, Seth. Well done. So yeah, that really, and that was one of the reasons for the card captors and such, is that folks were like, wait, hey, we can make Pokemon money? Let's try to do that. Yeah, it was, well, the Pokemon manga was, it was not risque by Japanese standards, but Japanese audiences are just much more comfortable with the idea that children know what, the human body looks like. And so, we're not going to show that front and center in a manga, for example, but we can be a little bit more risque than an American thing would be, and we can do more fantasy violence and such than we would over here. So you're absolutely right, Suzume, that it was much more risque than we would see over here, but by Japanese standards, it was like, this is fine. So that was kind of an issue as well. But yeah, huge cultural shift. Lest we forget, and you guys probably, most of you weren't around for this, until Pokemon came out, if I told people I watched anime, they would blink and just ask, what is that? They had no idea what that term means. After Pokemon, they knew what anime meant, right? That absolutely pushed anime, not just the word, but just people knowing what that medium was, into the average American public consciousness. And it didn't hurt, in terms of popularity, the fact that Pokemon was also controversial for being gambling. And people were claiming that Pokemon was gambling, and it was being targeted towards kids, and so it was evil and needed to be shut down. And it should be, banned, basically. Just like loot boxes today. So yeah, that was, and the trading card game was massive. There was a local card game shop where they announced they were going to offer Pokemon gaming like on Saturday mornings, and like the first day 20 kids showed up just out of nowhere, and boom, this thing, everyone was buying and trading Pokemon cards from the beginning, and then Yu-Gi-Oh and the rest. Yu-Gi-Oh is probably the next big success. Maybe Digimon. Digimon certainly did well. There were a lot of products available. It felt like a full-scale franchise over here in America, and we were getting the shows pretty quickly, right? It wasn't like we had to wait, Hello. Focus on my hand. Now focus on me. There we are. But yeah, they were supporting that franchise heavily over here in America. But I would say Yu-Gi-Oh is the one that really hit, and folks bought that merch, and they continue to buy that merch. That is a huge success, both in America and Japan. And so you get the death of the rental stores. When Blockbuster died, that was a significant shift to anime as well, because for a lot of folks, Blockbuster was where you got anime. There weren't a lot of other options, and so you had to go to Netflix or to other online services. And this is back when Netflix didn't have a streaming service. It was just DVDs in the mail. So yeah, that was a significant change to the business model, where suddenly we had to look for other ways of getting anime than just VHS, and that also helped with fan subs, helped push people towards fan subs. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, nice, Kaminoko. Yeah, totally. I did too. Totally. And that was one of the issues, is that once you can't rent it anymore, and you're reliant on a Netflix, and back then Netflix had virtually zero anime. They had very little anime for a long time. So you had to go to fan subs or what have you to get your anime. Now, of course, by then you had anime conventions that folks could attend, and those had a good number of dealers in them. But yeah, it's actually an interesting point, Ginger Gaiden, about Pokemon. I mean, one of the reasons why Pokemon was banned so hard is because that stuff hadn't appeared before. Kids weren't reading manga before Pokemon came out in any scale. You get the occasional weird kid who read manga, but kids did not, consume this thing in general. So suddenly now it was there, and because manga could be more risque, because it could have, a topless girl from the back or what have you, or worse, suddenly now it was something that teachers and school administrators and such were exposed to, and so you got that big backlash. And we've mostly figured out, okay, there's a gradation there. Yeah. Yeah, I remember I signed up for the, I think, 3 at a time Netflix plan, because if you loved anime, you didn't want to have one DVD at a time. You wanted to get them and watch 2 in one night, and then send that back and, be able to go really quickly. So you really wanted to go to go. You wanted a lot of those discs at once. Yeah. And that's a fair point. There were certainly kids who were being ripped off, and kids who were being charged ridiculously high prices for Pokemon cards. And then just kids being immature, right? Yeah. Yeah, that was, I will admit, 3 at a time was a significant expense. It was not a decision I took lightly. But yeah, it was, and that was really cool when you could do that. Oh, and then how long it would take to get there. Yeah, I was lucky that we got a Netflix distribution center pretty quickly. It used to take a long time, but then it got a little faster. And now you just go on Netflix or go on Crunchyroll, and boom. Speaking of Crunchyroll, I mean, people tend to forget that Crunchyroll started as a pirate fan sub streaming site. Like, it was just like all the other ones where they were putting up fan subs and streaming it illegally and pocketing the cash. And then something happened that made them go legit. They worked out some deal with the original companies, and I would love to know the backstory behind that. Haven't come across any official explanations about it. and that's where Crunchyroll came from. Yeah, physical Netflix was a lot of fun, and this gets back to that earlier point that when when a physical piece of media arrives in the mail and you open it up, that's a procedure. It's exciting to go through that ritual. I'm reading Here with a Thousand Faces, the Joseph Campbell book, all about myth and such. And one of his points is that earlier cultures had all of these elaborate rituals around coming of age, around marriage, around, a monarch ascending the throne, because it is important to change your mental outlook when your life is going through a major change. You don't want to, if you get married, still act like you're single. So cultures built up these strong rituals to get people out of that old mindset into the new. Getting physical media is a ritual. Opening up that package, popping the disc into your disk drive, waiting for it to spin up, all those things get you in the mood to watch anime. So that was exciting. And I think it's one of the things that we don't get now with streaming, but we get a much larger catalog, right? So I can't complain. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Right Stuff was this tiny little catalog run by anime fans, and now it's a really huge catalog run by anime fans. And they were just, they were the place to go, and still are to an extent, for buying anime. Like if you want to buy anime from fans, that they do it. They have good prices, and they do really fun things. And they still do a physical catalog, actually, which is really cool. I'm subscribed, and I still get those physical Right Stuff catalogs, and it's fun flipping through and seeing the art, seeing how many things I recognize, how many things I want to try out. It's really fun. And again, it's different. It's a different way of consuming media. And again, to be clear, further, I'm not saying that the old way of doing things in physical media was better, just that it had attributes that were helpful that we don't get now. And streaming has attributes that are helpful that we didn't have then. It will be interesting to see if, how much physical media we'll have in 5 or 10 years. Whether that's even going to be worth making, right? It's the thing in video games. Actually, let me I need to take a quick research break in the other room. I'll be back in a moment. Let me go over to standby. Give me about 2-3 minutes. Okay, let's get back to it. Apologies, but the body would not wait any longer on that particular desire, particular requirement, so to speak. So yeah, I wanted to talk about physical media at all. Yeah, this is a big thing in video gaming right now, a big topic. More and more people, when a game is announced, they just go onto their console and say, I want that game. And then when the game is released, it appears on their console. It's a heck of a lot more convenient than physical media. And sure, you're not collecting that physical media anymore. But what is the, increasingly it's kind of like, okay, yeah, you could have a physical copy of that and it's there forever. But fewer and fewer people find that worthwhile versus just tapping the X button a couple of times to pre-order it and just have it and buy it and it's there. So I can see a day where you don't get physical releases of video games, right? And same thing with anime. There could be a day where they just don't bother to do discs of things. It's just all streaming. I mean, we're already moving to that direction. There's plenty of anime on Crunchyroll that's not on DVD or Blu-ray, and probably never will. So yeah, that could just be where we're moving as a society. The physical media is inefficient, so to speak. And let's also be honest, physical media is a lot of waste. It's a lot of physical stuff that has to be produced that consumes resources, right? All of those discs getting pressed, all of that plastic being made for all of those DVD cases and so forth. If we were a society where all that doesn't get made, right, that could have a positive impact environmentally. But it means we would not have those physical representations of that thing anymore. And of course, you have that with video games, you have that issue of what if they shut off the service and so I can't access those games anymore, right? That is also certainly a factor in video games. And it's a factor in anime too. Things leave Crunchyroll, as we talked about before. But it's certainly possible that, old fans love VHS. I don't know why. There are not a lot of advantages of VHS over DVD or Blu-ray. But, every medium has its fans, but that doesn't necessarily mean that society keeps up with it, right? Yeah, and it's a valid point too, Spindowin. That if you don't have the physical media, then as soon as you're done watching it, it goes out out of your head much more easily, right? If those things aren't reminding you of things, aren't reminding you of those shows. Now, some would argue that that's not a bad thing. Because I've been going through this myself, kind of psychologically. This question of, do I really want to be reminded of every anime I've ever seen every day when I walk into my house? Like, do I really need to be reminded of watching Creamy Mommy 10 years ago, right? There's something to be said for saying maybe you should let that fade away and so you can focus on other things. But that's a deep philosophical question that's, a bit beyond most bits of the conversation here. But it is an impact that when you stream stuff, you watch it and then you stop watching it, and okay, and it's kind of gone. Now the other point, the other possibility is that just because physical media goes away doesn't mean that box sets won't necessarily go away, in the sense that you could, imagine the next, Zelda game comes out and they sell a collector's edition that contains, a replica Master Sword and a strategy guide and the soundtrack and an art book and no physical media, right? But you buy this thing and get all this cool stuff in it. Sure. Right? So we can still get physical products out of these things, tangible mementos, just not necessarily media itself. Who knows? It'll be weird, like you're saying, Suzume. It's a weird time to live. There's one of my favorite gaming memories was in an MMO that does not exist anymore. Right? I was shaken to the core by that moment in that video game, and no one can experience that. And on the one hand, again, maybe that's as it should be. I don't know. Yeah, you're right, Seth. And there's a lot to be said for pouring through some dealer's box of VHS tapes and coming across a VHS you've never heard of, and taking it home and finding, Vampire Princess Miyu or some, thing that's completely obscure now. And that's the thing. And you can discover those things because it is a physical thing. You can then boot in. The game, I do not remember the name of the game. Let me just really quick. Early. Was that it? No. Looking up histories of earliest MMOs. This was very early. This was, around the time of the initial release of EverQuest. So there were text games and there were graphical games, Ultima Online and such. No. Wow, The Realm. Furcadia. None of these. No. No. That doesn't list any of them. So it was a game where you are all, where the world was a massive shared dream. That the civilization had unlocked the ability of lucid dreaming, and more importantly, shared lucid dreaming. And so they had constructed this entire fantasy world in their dreams. And then these things called nightmares had appeared, and basically destroyed that dream world. And so you were a person who was now reawakening into that world that had been, annihilated in an apocalypse, and you were trying to rebuild it. Let's see here. This is setting graphic initial release date. Let's see here. No one's heard of it. Was it? Could be that one. I'm just Googling, early MMOs and trying to find the one, because it did not have a particularly memorable name, as I recall. Underlight? No, doesn't look like it. Plane Shift? No, more generic fantasy. Entropia Universe? No, this had like in-game currency. Planets? No, was not this. Ah! This must be it. Yeah. Underlight. Under and then light as in light and dark was apparently the game. Came out in 1998. To give you an idea. And it ran until 2006, surprisingly. Recently relaunched by KoeiWare in 2014, but it may not still be around. I don't know. Yeah, and granted, understandably, it would be really hard to bring an MMO back online. So it's not something that it's not like an old game, like an old single player game where a developer can just kind of hand the discs off to somebody. Often there's a lot of complexity to that. Focus on hand, focus on me. Focus on hand, focus on me. One moment. I should just nail this down. Boop. Oh, but then it does that weird thing with the lighting. Now it's doing that weird thing with the lighting. Well, we'll live with this for now. The moment that took me to my core, try to give you the brief explanation. In the game, in order to get past, I think, level 5, you had to choose one particular house that you allied with. And there were several different houses in the game, and each one had its own opinion on what to do about the nightmares, these creatures that had destroyed the world and were occasionally still appearing and causing damage. They're basically the monsters, the mobs. And the perspectives were basically things like the nightmares should be killed on sight. The nightmares should be captured and studied. The nightmares should be captured, studied, and killed. The nightmares should be left alone, right? And I was fairly middle of the road on that. I was like, because the nightmares would frequently show up in like the dungeons and the underworld of the game, and they were destructive. They'd go around and such. And so I was like, clearly they're not just random things that are basically peaceful. They're destructive. But I wasn't sure I wanted to go full on kill them all, like God sort them out. So I was around level 4, and I gone down into the under area, the caverns underneath the main city, and was fighting nightmares. And as I landed the killing blow on one of them, it spoke to me. It cried out in some alien language and then died. This had never happened to me before. I was not aware. I did a bit of research as best as I could. This is pre-Google. And I couldn't find any references to this actually happening to anyone else. And to be clear, this was very early, computer game period. Other characters there was no voice chat. There were, the sound effects were just the basic things in the game. There was no voice in the game. Just suddenly, one of the monsters said something to me as I was killing it. And it completely changed how I viewed that game. Because they were clearly intelligent on some level. And they wanted to communicate. I have no idea how they wrote that, whether that was intentional, whether they, coded it so that if you were way down alone and no one else around, this would happen to you. And so people would have to kind of guess what was going on. But it was a brilliant bit of theater in that game because I was facing this question, and further, I had to ask this question. I had to ask the question: what if that hadn't happened, and I had aligned myself with a house that was vicious towards the nightmares, and this happened to me after I made that decision? You could not back out. Once you chose a house, you were done. So it was fascinating. It was a really remarkable moment in my perspective on the game and my perspective on how the designers were planning the exposure of players to the lore of that game. Where it wasn't just, oh, there are books scattered around that will give you the lore. No, you were uncovering things as you explored the world, and presumably you were expected to then pass that on to other people. It was this living, active world in 1998. Right? So it was just really cool to see somebody with that level of thought about a game. Anyway, DS Lite, what are you thinking of Eureka 7? Because Eureka's a show that I was mightily impressed with, but didn't really connect with me very deeply. So what it's worth, I love Kiwami. Yakuza Kiwami is fantastic. One of my favorite games of, this generation. Not that I'm exposed to a lot of games this generation, but so yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right about video games as a service. That it makes a lot more sense for video games to go discless because these are basically services you subscribe to, not one and done video games. So that makes sense. And especially if you're a small publisher making a Celeste or one of these little $20 games, why would you want to invest in pressing all those discs that are just going to suck all the money out of your wallet? Yes, I have seen Key the Metal Idol all the way through. Yes, that was an experience. I have a cell from Key the Metal Idol, actually, framed, because I was sucked into that show. The ending was the movie ending was very satisfying. It tied up all the loose ends. It gave you a very complete ending. But gosh, the TV series really feels like, what? This is where they end? But then, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree, Suzume. I am saddened with the fact that MMOs have this very strong formula. I'd love to see more MMOs that are trying weird new things. But I'm the same way with fantasy games, with video games in general. It's like, why are so many of your games shooters? I'm tired of shooting things. Let me do things other than shooting things, or swing swords. Right? But we've gone over that territory before. Okay, thanks DS Lite. That's helpful to know about Eureka. That it's kind of fillery. Yeah, I watched the first disc. It was the first 4 episodes, and it felt a little fillery early on. It's definitely a show that has rabid fans. Not a huge fan base, but strong fan base. Yeah, it's interesting how these media, do kind of nail themselves down to predictable formulae. It's what Anno complains about all the time, that anime of the 70s and 80s were inventive and weird. And it's true, because it was a smaller medium. It was catering to a different fan base. It wasn't under as much scrutiny as anime is now. in its own ways. And so, of course, you can afford to be inventive, and you can't now. And you're also competing for time slots with people making, Date A Live, or I'm sorry, Love Live, and these big shows that where this is a cornerstone of a massive franchise, and you kind of can't do something small and weird anymore. You can, but it's much harder to fund those things. That's just the reality of any medium that's been around for a while. It gets kind of set in its ways. Yeah, definitely a complicated relationship between anime and video game fans, particularly because video games stole so many anime creators. So I shouldn't use the word stole. So many people in anime moved to video games because video games paid better, and it was an exciting medium and such, but also it paid better. Cool. Yeah, I love the dub of Eureka. That's one of those things I was listening. I was like, oh, the director of this is definitely has an idea of what the show is, and is giving them very specific direction about their characters and how they should be interacting. It felt like they were going for very specific relationships with that dub, which definitely helps. Sometimes they just don't know, and so they're kind of winging it because the Japanese staff hasn't told them where it's going. But the English dub for Eureka definitely felt much more grounded, like a Bebop, where like, oh, we know what this show is, we know where it's going. Yep. Yeah, you're right. There's that strong. I like anime, not video games. I like video games, not anime, which I was for a long time. Um, Partly because if you like anime and if you like certain kinds of anime, there's just not much in the video game world for you, right? At least in the console world. Like, if you love anime, it's like, well, I'd love to play Canon or Clannad. Uh, Although I think isn't Canon on PS3 or PS4? I don't know. But yeah, it's hard to find a lot of visual novels on consoles for understandable reasons. Yeah, Hellsing, definitely. Yeah, and granted, um, you don't find a lot of people who are big into anime and big into mystery novels, right? Because both of those take dedication. You got to kind of choose your hobby if you want to go deep into it. So, and that's a good point too, Suzume, where sometimes you just, you kind of saturate yourself with a particular market. Frankly, that's in a way where I've come to with the anime industry, where I've gotten to this point where I understand what they're making and why, and so it doesn't quite have that sense of wonder it had before. I still enjoy it. I still love it, but I'm not the rabid fan I was 10, 15 years ago, which is fine. It means I can, I change the pace at which I consume things. Um, and it also comes and goes. And you're absolutely right, Blue Dragon. One of the advantages right now is that there's a lot of really interesting video games out there that cover a wide variety of territory. You don't have to just shoot things. Um, yeah, and again, to be clear, Game Escape. That's why I was saying I'm speaking of consoles specifically, right? On PC, you can get a whole, oh gosh, you can get those things. But interesting, it's interesting too how the video game world tends to be console heavy, which is weird. But yeah, it goes back and forth. Right now, because the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox are mature consoles, there's a lot of stuff being made for it that's very interesting because people know what those consoles are capable of and they're pushing them to their extreme. I will almost certainly be buying and playing Ghost of Tsushima when it comes out because that is right down my alley. That checks all of my boxes right there, and that's because we're in this period. Once those new consoles come out, folks will probably be struggling to really figure out those consoles and what they can do, and we'll go into a lull on video games. The Switch was kind of a weird switcheroo because there was just such heavy support by that from Nintendo early on, in terms of big heavy hitter franchises coming out for it, and then a lot of indie games. So there was a wide variety available for Switch, but you don't see that quite as much, the first year of many console launches. Just from what I understand, speaking from the outside. Right, true, totally, Suzume. In fact, that's one of the reasons I've gotten more into manga, because I can read 10 volumes of a manga in a day. And that's that'll be multiple seasons of a show. So you can just pour through manga. But then, anime takes a while, and then a video game, okay, this is a 40-hour, 50-hour, 60-hour game. I'm like, I ain't got the time for that. Folks love Persona 5, and I'm sure Persona 5 is an amazing experience. But when you look at the time to beat on Persona 5, ain't gonna happen. One thing I would love to do, and I'd love to figure out some way of doing it here. Ooh, this would be a good idea. Maybe in the new year I'll do this. Like, not January 1st. I want to start playing through video games chronologically. Play Pong, and then play Asteroids, and just kind of go through, and obviously not every video game, but just go through this view and see what all those games are like. And obviously I played some of them, but I think it'd be really an interesting experience to see what it's like, what it was like going from 1982 to 1983 to 84 to 85. Doom, yeah. I think I've said it before. Doom is one of those games I do absolutely go back and replay every so often, because that is just such a fun game to play at an atomic level. And that's good to know. So you can kind of bounce back and forth with Persona 5. Cool, thanks. That's an option. Maybe next time it goes massively on sale, I'll buy it. But I have so many other video games. Yeah, I hear you, DS Lite. And like you say, Blue Dragon, some folks just like to collect, like that's their thing. But yeah, I do find it weird when folks have this huge collection and never actually do anything with it. Yeah, I could probably speedrun most of the levels myself as well. Doom is just... It's perfection in that sense that, it is perfection for what it is meant to be. All of those elements just fit together in an ideal state. What old anime do you think someone should watch? It depends on what they like. Unfortunately, that's just that's the thing. I do think it is important. I do think it is valuable to watch Astro Boy, Mobile Suit Gundam, Macross, Akira, and Ghost in the Shell, the movie, the original 1992, whatever it was, movie. Just because those were so important. But there's just so many other shows where it's like, oh, you may not like that thing. That is just so weird. Gunbuster's a great example. I think Gunbuster is absolutely a classic. But the whole first episode is a parody of tennis anime. And the rest of the show is not. Right? 91, thank you. And a lot of the rest of Gunbuster is a parody of existing anime cliches and anime storylines. And so a lot of folks are just going to watch that and just be confused. Now and then here and there, oof, bring the tissues. But that is a serious work of art. Yeah, and talking to video, you're right, DS Light. That is a great historical document about what anime fandom was like, in a way. Based on the anime you've watched, what do you think you like? Spin. Remind me of what anime you've watched. Let me just scroll up. I apologize. I'm terrible with connecting people to like their anime collections. Scrolling up. Yeah, let me know what are your favorite anime? Some of the older Miyazaki movies? Well, yeah, I mean, watch every Miyazaki movie, every Studio Ghibli movie for that. You're right with Netflix. Licensing Evangelion. I did not realize that Evangelion was so badly out of print. That'll be great. You are not alone. Yeah, Nat Hat is... Whoa. Yeah, you're right, Suzume. Me too. I can watch Yokohama Kadashi Kiko all day, every day. I mean, let's go back by decade. What are some of the 70s anime that I think people should watch? Again, kind of more from a historical perspective of these would be helpful to see what were big at the time or what caused big trends. I would say, again, Original Gundam, Cutie Honey, Lupin the Third, TV, and Casa Cagliostro. That was that period. Or no, was Cagliostro early 80s? Whatever. Anything else from the 70s that really, stands out? I'm probably missing something. Probably Mazinger Z. I would say it's worth going back and watching a Giant Robot series from the 70s. It's not Gundam. Get a sense of what that was like. Then moving forward to the 80s, I would say... Oh, no, still in the 70s, Space Battleship Yamato. Definitely. Not the entire thing. You don't have to watch the entire thing. Just watch some of it and get a sense of it. Galaxy Express 39s is worth it. And Captain Harlock. I would say Captain Harlock is... Man, that's... Yeah. Harlock's an impressive bit of art. 80s, Macross, Akira, Bubblegum Crisis, I would say, just because that was such a huge, huge show. I'm sure I'm missing something from the 80s. Certainly Ranma 1/2. I don't think you really need much of the Takahashi stuff before Ranma. Her earlier stuff is interesting, but it's just it wasn't what those things are. Urusei Yatsura and Maison Ikkoku just are interesting historical documents and were certainly getting popular for the time, but that's that thing. Patlabor, yeah, I think it's worth seeing Patlabor. Again, experiment, try it. But yeah, I think Patlabor was late 80s when it first the first thing came out. Um, I don't think you need to see Speed Racer. I think you can skip Speed Racer. It's interesting, but oh, Takahashi is not even an acquired taste. It is a taste. You do not need to like Takahashi. I'm with you. Like I don't. I can enjoy Takahashi, but it just doesn't do much for me. Let's see here. Anything else from the '80s that was a big deal or was a harbinger? Something will probably come to me. 90s, Bebop, Trigun. Again, just more because they were big hits in America. Um, well, we're all friends. I don't need to say things like Dragon Ball Z. Um, we all know what that is, and we've all probably seen some of that. 90s. And there's so much in the 90s, it's really hard to filter that out. Sailor Moon and all these other things that are still known today. So that's a hard one. I would say it's worth watching Tenchi Muyo because it's such a long running franchise and it was so big in the day and it does still have its legs. I'm not gonna say Big O. Big O is amazing, but it just wasn't. Same thing with Tylor. Like I love both those things. They just weren't really they didn't set the world on fire. El Hazard, man. So I would recommend El Hazard for the same reason I recommend Tenchi. It's not for everyone, but it's worth seeing two pretty big franchises of the day. Stuff that just hit big, for like 3 years. Although Tenchi went on for longer than that, but just this was it. Obviously Eva. Eva has to be in there. Lane. Slayers. Yeah. You know what? Slayers is a good recommendation in the sense that it's just this fun, light thing that I think a lot of folks just aren't aware of. And again, it was a big franchise that kind of people don't talk about anymore. Although there was a Slayers pinball machine in Akihabara when I was there. So it certainly has legs in Japan. Yeah, I call the 90s the golden age of anime when I talk about it at conventions. When I present about anime history, I consider it to be a golden age because it spawned so many huge franchises and there was so much money in the industry. Golden Boy. Again, I'm probably forgetting something huge from the 90s. But yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Lotus War, yeah, I think that's borderline. It was popular, but it wasn't that massive. There was what? 2 OVAs. Well, I mean, it depends on how you count that, because like Legend of Castania is set in the world of Lotus War. So yeah, that kind of counts. Berserk. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, Berserk gets one of those, research it beforehand and walk into it knowing it is a classic, but it is very much for specific tastes. Yeah, I'd say Lane. Lane deserves to be in there. Partly because of its sort of fame within the anime industry. Yeah, Bebop, Trigun. Yeah, you're right, Liquidus. It is interesting to point out that sometimes, Slayers got a really fun dub, and it was arguably the first, the first dub that people would listen to by choice. See you, Master Chief. Thanks for stopping by. Um, so yeah, you do get that difference where sometimes that was part of the appeal. It'd be interesting to go back and see if we'll. I mean, if I wonder if we'll ever get an uncut Digimon, because they had to edit. I mean, they didn't edit a lot, but they reworked a significant amount of Digimon to make sense to Western kids. A lot of cultural references had to be reworked and things like that. Um, they didn't get away with a lot. Sakura, yeah, Sakura would be a big one. Modern, see, I don't, I can't give recommendations for modern because we don't know what's huge. What are the shows everyone talks about. So, I don't know. What do I think deserves? Yeah, I think we're too close to it. We're too close to that stuff. Maybe stuff from the 2000s, but I'd have to remind myself of the shows in the 2000s. Um, um, you're right, Gene. Well, Netflix has announced, they're making a live action Cowboy Bebop. Whether it will actually see the light of day is another question. I'm always a little skeptical, but yeah, I don't. I couldn't even tell you what are the big ones from the 2000s. You're right, Spindowin. Utna. Utna would be in there. Definitely, Utna's worth checking out. Spot on. Hmm. Here's the 2000s. I guess. I mean, so here's a good example. Clannad. That was massive for a hot minute, and people still love it. But has that stood the test of time? That was what 2007, I think. I don't know. Oh, interesting. Roger Devilman. Yeah, multiple dubs of Sailor Moon, multiple dubs of Dragon Ball Z. I guess not. I mean, Dragon Ball Z got the dub changed, right? But Lucky Star. Yeah. Well, Haruhi Suzumiya. Definitely there's a show from the 2000s where I would say Gurren Lagann definitely. Initial D. Yeah. Um Initial D. Yeah, that counts. I think that's worth being aware of. Mm. Or Lucky Star gets on that cusp where if you know what it is and you understand how you if you understand that there's a ridiculous goofy comedy. Code Geass, I don't know. Again, popular for a hot minute, but it seemed to have died out mostly. You get stuff like Prince of Tennis, right? Prince of Tennis was beyond. I wouldn't say GTO, no. FMA, yeah, you're right. FMA would be a Fullmetal Alchemist is a big one. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this. Some friends came over, I don't know, a week or two ago, and one of them was just getting into anime, and we went through my collection, and I happened to have Fullmetal Alchemist on there. And as you all know, I tried Fullmetal Alchemist some years ago, and it just didn't click for me. And he was like, I'm curious about FMA. So he popped on and watched the first like 2 episodes of FMA, and I was thoroughly entertained. Like I like that show a lot more this time around. So maybe I'll go ahead and watch it now, sometime soon. Azumanga Daioh, yeah. I would put Azumanga Daioh again in that kind of middle ground where understand it's a goofy slice of life comedy. Sorry, goofy slice of life comedy. Death Note's got to be there. Death Note definitely. Yeah, Kino's Journey in that middle ground. Know what it is. It did not set the world on fire, but it was, if you like it, if it's anywhere in your wheelhouse, you will love it. For Kino's Journey. Eureka 7. Yeah, totally agreed. Lucky Star and Azumanga are stretches. Research them first. They're not watch. Yeah, I don't know. Furry Curry is kind of borderline for me as well. I think Furry Curry was just a weird experiment. Um, it wasn't really a it didn't really change anything. Hmm. But you're right, Spindowin. This Lucky Star as a manga have definitely died in popularity. So yeah, I don't know. IGPX. Hmm. Anything else in the 2000s? And again, this is why it's kind of hard to say because Eureka, well, it bounces around. You know, a few years ago, I would have discounted Eureka 7, but they did that new movie. So it's like, oh, well, okay. Um, hmm. What else was out? Again, I feel like I'm missing something obvious from the 2000s, but. All right. I've been online for almost 2 hours now. Escaflowne, no. I gotta love Escaflowne, but it's too obscure, sadly. But yeah, I'm going to sign off partly because I've gotten no sleep this week, practically. So I need to go and crash for a little bit. Maybe watch some more of the Great British Baking Show, because why not? I love watching people struggle to bake and then hug each other. So I hope you guys have a great week. We'll be doing the Anime Club tomorrow, and on the schedule is I think Erased. Is that what we're showing? That we're watching? We are watching Bokurano. The first 4 episodes of Bokurano tomorrow on the Anime Club. So bring a tissue, and it's going to be an interesting one. We'll see how far we get. Might be episode 1. Who knows? So, yep. Thank you all. Have a great one. See you next time. You all rock.